The manila envelope in Paige Keller's trembling hands contained her entire future, and it was crushing her under the weight of 6 figures she could never repay. She sat on the cracked vinyl chair in the hospital's financial counseling office, staring at the astronomical number that represented her father's medical bills, her student loans, and the second mortgage she'd taken out on her childhood home when things got truly desperate. $147,000 might as well have been $1 billion. At 26, working as a museum curator's assistant with a salary that barely covered her rent, she had no path forward that didn't involve bankruptcy, and even that felt like a luxury she couldn't afford because of how it would destroy what little remained of her credit. Miss Keller. The financial counselor's voice was kind but professional. We can set up a payment plan, but I have to be honest with you. Based on your income, you're looking at paying this off for the next 20 years, minimum. 20 years. Paige felt something inside her crack. Her father had passed away 3 months ago, and she'd barely had time to grieve because she'd been drowning in paperwork, bills, and the desperate hunt for a second job. She nodded mechanically, signed the papers the counselor slid across the desk, and walked out into the gray Seattle morning feeling like a ghost. The Burke Museum of Natural and Cultural History stood as a beacon of calm in her chaotic life. Paige loved her job, even if it didn't pay enough. She loved the smell of old artifacts, the careful preservation work, the way history whispered through every exhibit. Today, she was helping set up a new installation on Pacific Northwest maritime history, carefully arranging antique compasses and sextants in their display cases. "Paige, you have a visitor," her supervisor, Margaret, called from across the gallery. "Someone asking specifically for you." Paige looked up, confused. She wasn't expecting anyone. The man walking toward her didn't belong in the quiet, dusty corners of a museum. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, and he moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a price tag. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She recognized him immediately, though she'd never actually met him. Julian Everett, CEO of Everett Maritime Solutions, one of the largest shipping and logistics companies in North America. His face had been on the cover of Forbes 3 months ago. The company had contracts with half the ports on the West Coast and was expanding internationally. He was 32, wildly successful, and according to the business magazines, notoriously private. "Miss Keller." His voice was deep, professional. "I'm Julian Everett. I wonder if you have a few minutes to speak privately." Paige glanced at Margaret, who looked equally stunned. "I suppose. There's a conference room in the back." They walked in silence through the museum's warren of hallways. Paige's mind raced with possibilities. Had she somehow offended one of the museum's donors? Was this about the maritime exhibit? She couldn't imagine what a man like Julian Everett would want with her. The conference room was small, barely more than a closet with a table and 4 chairs. Julian waited until she sat before taking the chair across from her. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm going to make you an unusual proposition, Miss Keller, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Paige's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Okay, I need a wife, temporarily. For 6 months, to be specific." He said it like he was discussing a business merger, his expression unreadable. "In exchange, I'll pay off your debt, all of it. The medical bills, your student loans, the mortgage, everything." The room seemed to tilt. Paige gripped the edge of the table. "I'm sorry, what? I know this sounds insane. I know we're complete strangers. But I'm in a situation where I need to be married for 6 months, and you're in a situation where you need a considerable sum of money. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. Why me? Why do you need to be married? This doesn't make any sense. Julian leaned back in his chair, and for the first time she saw something other than professional detachment in his eyes. Frustration, maybe. My grandfather founded Everett Maritime. When he died 2 years ago, he left me control of the company with one condition buried in the will. I have to be married before my 33rd birthday, or controlling interest passes to my uncle, who will promptly run the company into the ground and destroy everything my grandfather built. That's medieval, Paige said. That's my grandfather. He had very traditional views about family and legacy. Julian's jaw tightened. My birthday is in 6 months and 2 weeks. I've spent 2 years fighting this in court, but the will is ironclad. I'm out of options and out of time. But why me? Paige repeated. You're rich and successful. Surely you know someone who would do this. Everyone I know in my social circle would either have ulterior motives or would expect something I can't give. The women I've dated want real relationships, real feelings. I can't offer that. His gaze was direct, almost clinical. I need someone outside my world, someone with their own pressing reasons to agree, who won't expect this to turn into something it isn't. Your situation makes you ideal. How do you even know about my situation? A chill ran down her spine. I sponsor this museum. I was reviewing the staff roster for the Maritime exhibit because it features items from my family's collection. Your name came up. I have people who do background checks on everyone involved with my donated items. When I saw your financial situation, I realized you might be open to an arrangement that would benefit us both. It should have felt invasive, creepy even, but Paige was too stunned to feel anything but a strange, disconnected curiosity. What exactly would this arrangement entail? Julian pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. This is a contract drafted by my lawyers. We would legally marry and live together to maintain appearances. Separate bedrooms, separate lives as much as possible. We would need to attend social functions together and present a united front to my family and the board. After 6 months and 1 day, we divorce quietly. You walk away with your debt paid and a settlement of an additional $200,000. $200,000. On top of having her debt erased. Paige's hands shook as she opened the folder. The contract was dense with legal language, but the terms were clear. 6 months, complete discretion. All her debts paid within 1 week of the marriage, the settlement paid upon divorce. This is crazy, she whispered. Yes, Julian agreed, but it's also practical. You need money, I need a wife. 6 months from now, we both get what we need and go our separate ways. What if it doesn't work? What if you're bored or your uncle figures out it's fake? Then we make sure it's not fake enough for them to question. We'll be legally married. We'll live together. As far as anyone knows, we met, fell in love quickly, and got married. It happens. His expression didn't change. I'm very good at making things look exactly how I need them to look. Paige stared at the contract. $147,000 of debt. 20 years of payments. The constant anxiety that had become her baseline existence. She thought about her father, about how he'd worked himself to death trying to provide for her, about the guilt that gnawed at her every day because she couldn't even honor his memory by paying off the bills he'd left behind. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours. Julian stood, pulling a business card from his wallet. My personal number is on the back. Call me with your answer. He left as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving Paige alone with the contract and a decision that felt impossible. She sat in the conference room for 20 minutes, reading and rereading the terms before Margaret found her. What did Julian Everett want with you? Margaret's eyes were wide with curiosity. He's interested in expanding the maritime exhibit, Paige lied smoothly. Wants me to consult on some family pieces. It was the first of many lies she'd have to tell if she said yes. That night, Paige sat in her tiny apartment with the contract spread across her kitchen table. Her best friend, Rachel, sat across from her, reading through the pages with increasing disbelief. "This is actually insane," Rachel said. "Like certifiably insane, I know. But also, it would solve all your problems." "I know." Rachel set down the contract and looked at Paige seriously. "What's your gut telling you?" Paige closed her eyes. Her gut was telling her she'd spent 3 months drowning and someone had just thrown her a lifeline. It was an insane lifeline, attached to a man she didn't know, but it was the only one she had. "My gut is telling me that I'm 26 years old and I'm already buried under so much debt, I'll never have a real life. I can't date because I can't afford to go anywhere. I can't take risks in my career because I need every penny. I'm just surviving, Rachel. I'm not living." "And you think marrying a stranger for 6 months is living?" "I think it's a way to start living. After." Paige opened her eyes. "It's 6 months, half a year. People do harder things for less." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "If you do this, I've got your back, always." "But you need to be sure." Paige wasn't sure, but she was desperate, and sometimes desperation was its own kind of certainty. She called Julian the next morning. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." "Name them." His voice was crisp, businesslike. "First, I need my own space in whatever house we're living in. A room where I can be alone when I need to be. Second, I need to be able to keep working. I'm not giving up my job. Third, I want absolute honesty between us about the arrangement. No games, no manipulation. Agreed on all counts." "Can you meet me this afternoon? We should move quickly. I'll have my lawyer present to finalize the contract." 3 days later, Paige Keller became Paige Everett in a quiet ceremony at the courthouse. She wore a simple cream dress she'd bought on sale. Julian wore a navy suit and a watch that probably cost more than her annual salary. There were 2 witnesses, both Julian's employees, and the whole thing took less than 15 minutes. "You're married," the judge said, and Paige felt the surreal weight of those words settle over her like a blanket. Julian's house was not a house. It was a modern masterpiece overlooking Puget Sound, all glass and clean lines and space that seemed to go on forever. Paige stood in the foyer with her 2 suitcases and tried not to gape. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the left," Julian said, loosening his tie. "Mine is the master suite at the end of the hall. There's a housekeeper who comes 3 times a week. She'll stock whatever food you want. Just make a list. This is really your house." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For the first time, she saw something that might have been amusement flicker across his face. "Yes, I know it's excessive. My grandfather believed in showing success. I just wanted something with a good view." The view was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Sound, the islands beyond, the endless sky. Paige had spent her whole life in cramped apartments and small spaces. This felt like standing on top of the world. "I'll let you settle in," Julian said. "We have dinner with my mother and uncle tomorrow night. It's important they believe this is real." The weight of what she'd agreed to hit her fully for the first time. She wasn't just living in this house. She was going to have to convince his family, his colleagues, everyone in his life, that she was madly in love with a man she'd known for 3 days. Her room was bigger than her entire apartment had been. King-sized bed, sitting area, private bathroom with a soaking tub, and a walk-in closet that was currently very empty. She unpacked her meager belongings and felt like a child playing dress-up in an adult's life. That night, she lay awake in her enormous bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere down the hall, Julian was presumably sleeping in his own room, her husband. The thought was so absurd she almost laughed. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd just done. Dinner with Julian's family was exactly as intimidating as Paige had feared. His mother, Victoria Everett, was elegant and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could spot a fake designer bag from across a room. She definitely could spot a fake marriage. His uncle, Richard Everett, was heavy-set and pompous, with the air of a man who believed the world owed him something. "This is all very sudden," Victoria said, her tone carefully neutral. They were in a private dining room at one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants. Paige felt underdressed, despite the new outfit Julian had insisted on buying her that afternoon. "When you know," Julian said smoothly, reaching across the table to take Paige's hand. His touch was warm, his fingers strong. It felt shockingly intimate despite being for show. "I met Paige at the museum and I couldn't stop thinking about her." "A museum curator," Richard said, making it sound like an insult. "How quaint." "Assistant curator," Paige corrected, keeping her voice steady. "I specialize in preservation and exhibit design. The museum is actually featuring pieces from the Everett family collection right now." "So you knew who Julian was when you met him," Victoria said. "It wasn't quite an accusation, but close." "I knew of him," Paige said carefully, "but we met because he came to see his grandfather's compass. We started talking about maritime history, and he asked me to dinner." The lie came more easily than it should have. Julian had coached her on the story during the car ride over. "My grandson has never been impulsive," Victoria said, studying them both. "Maybe I was waiting for the right reason to be impulsive," Julian said. He looked at Paige, and for a moment, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. He was a very good actor. The dinner lasted 3 hours. By the end, Paige's cheeks hurt from smiling, and she felt exhausted from the constant vigilance of maintaining their story. In the car on the way home, she let her head fall back against the seat and closed her eyes. "You did well," Julian said. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. "Your mother doesn't believe us. She's suspicious. But she'll come around. We just need to be consistent. Your uncle hates me." "My uncle hates everyone. Don't take it personally." Julian's hands were steady on the wheel as they wound through the dark streets toward the house. "He knows that if I stay married, he loses his chance at the company. He'll try to find proof this isn't real. So we have to be more convincing." "Exactly." The next few weeks fell into a strange rhythm. Paige went to work every day at the museum, though she no longer worried about the bills piling up on her kitchen table because she no longer had bills. Julian had paid off everything within 3 days of their marriage, just as promised. The relief was so profound it made her dizzy. Evenings were spent learning to coexist. Julian worked late most nights, coming home after 9 and disappearing into his home office. When they were together, their interactions were polite but distant. He was unfailingly courteous, asking about her day, making sure she had everything she needed. But there was a wall between them, carefully maintained on both sides, except when they were in public. Then Julian transformed. He held her hand, put his arm around her waist, looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the world. At a charity gala 2 weeks into their marriage, he pulled her onto the dance floor and held her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. "You're tense," he murmured against her ear. "I'm not used to heels this high," she whispered back. Another thing Julian had insisted on, a wardrobe appropriate for his wife. Her closet was now full of designer dresses and shoes that cost more than her monthly rent used to. "Just follow my lead." His hand was firm on her back, guiding her through the steps. He was an excellent dancer, confident and smooth. Paige let herself relax into his rhythm, and for a moment it almost felt real. Like they were actually a couple, actually in love, actually choosing to be here together. "People are watching," Julian said quietly. "Your mother, and half the board of directors." He spun her gently and she caught glimpses of the crowd around them. Julian was right. They were being watched carefully. "Smile, you're supposed to be enjoying yourself." "I am enjoying myself," Paige said, and realized it was true. When was the last time she'd been to an event like this? When had she last worn a dress that made her feel beautiful, danced with a man who knew how to lead, let herself exist in a moment without the constant anxiety of debt crushing her? Something in Julian's expression shifted. "Good," he said, and his voice was softer than usual. That night, after they got home and Paige had kicked off the torture devices that passed for shoes, she found Julian in the kitchen making tea. It was the first time she'd seen him do something so domestic. "Want some?" he offered. "Sure." She sat on one of the bar stools and watched him work. He moved with the same efficiency he brought to everything, no wasted motion. "You were good tonight," he said, sliding a mug across the counter to her. "Natural, people believed us." "It's getting easier," Paige admitted. "The lying." "Does that bother you?" She considered the question. "It should, shouldn't it? But mostly I just feel relieved. For the first time in years I'm not drowning. I can breathe." Julian leaned against the counter, studying her. "What was it like before?" "Suffocating." Paige wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "My dad got sick 2 years ago, cancer. He didn't have good insurance and the treatments were expensive. I took out loans, maxed out credit cards, did everything I could. But it wasn't enough. He died anyway and all I had left was the debt." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" The question came out more challenging than she intended. "You used that information to get me to agree to this." "Yes," Julian said. He didn't apologize or look away. "I used it because I needed a solution, and you needed a solution, and I saw a way for both of us to get what we needed. That doesn't mean I'm not sorry your father died." His honesty was disarming. Paige took a sip of her tea. "What was your grandfather like? Stubborn, traditional, brilliant in business but terrible at understanding people." Julian's expression grew distant. "He loved me in his way, but he always thought he knew what was best. The marriage clause in the will was his attempt to force me to settle down, have a family, continue the legacy. And you don't want that. I want the company. I want to do the work. I don't need a wife and children to validate my existence." He said it matter-of-factly, like it was a simple truth rather than something sad. Paige thought about her own life, the dreams she'd put on hold because of debt. She'd always imagined falling in love, getting married, having kids someday. But those dreams had felt increasingly distant as reality crushed her under its weight. "What about after?" she asked. "After 6 months, when this is over, what do you want then? To keep building what my grandfather started, to expand the company, make it better, stronger?" Julian met her eyes. "What about you?" "I don't know," Paige admitted. "I haven't been able to think past survival for so long. Maybe I'll travel, go back to school for my doctorate, actually live for once." "You should," Julian said. "Live, I mean. That's what the settlement money is for." They finished their tea in comfortable silence, and when Paige went to bed that night, she felt something unfamiliar. Not quite happiness, but maybe the beginning of hope. The first real crack in their carefully maintained distance came 3 weeks into the marriage. Paige came home from work to find Julian sitting in the living room staring out at the sound. It was barely 6 o'clock, hours before he usually returned from the office. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Bad day." His voice was tight. Paige set down her bag. Every instinct told her to respect his privacy, go to her room, let him deal with whatever it was alone. but something in the set of his shoulders stopped her. "Want to talk about it? My uncle is making moves, talking to board members, planting seeds of doubt about my leadership. About our marriage." Julian rubbed his face. "He's hired an investigator to dig into our relationship. Will they find something? Not if we're careful. The marriage is legal. We live together. We appear in public together. On paper, everything looks legitimate." He looked at her then, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "But Richard knows me. He knows I've never been romantic or impulsive. He's looking for cracks. Then we don't give him any. It means we need to be more convincing, more time together in public, maybe some social media posts. A weekend trip where people might see us." Julian stood, pacing to the window. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for." "I signed up for 6 months of pretending to be your wife," Paige said. "That includes being convincing. What do you need me to do?" They spent the evening planning a weekend trip to Vancouver, where Julian had a conference and could bring his new wife. More date nights at visible restaurants. A carefully curated Instagram presence showing their life together. "We should probably have some couple photos around the house too," Paige suggested. "In case anyone visits." "Good thinking." Julian made a note on his phone. "We can do a photo session tomorrow." The photo session was awkward at first. They stood in various locations around the house while Julian's assistant took pictures on her phone. Sitting on the couch together, cooking in the kitchen, standing on the deck overlooking the water. Every pose felt forced and unnatural. "You both look miserable," the assistant, a cheerful woman named Sophie, finally said. "Can you at least pretend you like each other?" "We do like each other," Julian said. "Then show it. Touch each other like you mean it. Look at each other like you see each other." Sophie gestured impatiently. "Mr. Everett, put your arm around her waist." Actually around her, not hovering awkwardly. Mrs. Everett leaned into him. "You're married, not strangers at a bus stop." Paige felt her face heat, but she stepped closer to Julian. His arm came around her waist, solid and warm. She let herself lean back against his chest. He was tall enough that her head fit perfectly under his chin. "Better," Sophie said, snapping pictures. "Now look at each other." Paige tilted her head up. Julian looked down at her. They were close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He smelled like expensive cologne and coffee. "Smile," Sophie instructed. "Like you're sharing a secret." Julian's lips quirked up and Paige found herself smiling back. For just a moment it didn't feel like acting. It felt like something real and warm and possible. "Perfect," Sophie said, reviewing the photos. "These are great. Very believable." After Sophie left, Paige looked through the photos on her phone. They did look believable. They looked like a couple in love, comfortable with each other, happy. It was disconcerting how easily the camera could lie. "These will work," Julian said, looking over her shoulder. "We can print a few for the house. Post some online." "Julian," Paige said slowly. "What happens if people get hurt by this? Your family, our friends. When we divorce, they'll think we failed. They'll be sad for us. They'll get over it. People get divorced every day. But it's all a lie." "Yes," Julian said. "It is, but it's a necessary one. You needed help. I needed a solution. This was the best option for both of us." Paige wanted to argue, but what could she say? He was right. She had needed help desperately, and this arrangement had given her breathing room she hadn't had in years. The lies bothered her, but not enough to walk away. The Vancouver trip happened 2 weeks later. They flew first class, which Paige had never experienced before, and stayed in a suite at a luxury hotel. 2 bedrooms connected by a shared living space, maintaining their careful boundaries even away from home. "I have conference sessions during the day," Julian explained as they settled into the suite. "But we should have dinner together each night somewhere visible. And tomorrow night is a gala. All the maritime industry leaders will be there. Another gala, Paige said, but she was smiling. She'd actually enjoyed the last one, once she'd relaxed enough to stop worrying about every word she said. "You're getting good at them," Julian observed. "Last time, you had 3 board members completely charmed. They told me I was lucky to have found you." "I am pretty charming," Paige joked. "You are," Julian said, and he sounded like he meant it. That afternoon, while Julian was at the conference, Paige explored Vancouver. She walked through Gastown, visited the art museum, had coffee at a cafe overlooking the harbor. For the first time in forever, she didn't check her bank balance before buying something. She didn't calculate whether she could afford a pastry with her coffee. The freedom was intoxicating. She bought a postcard and sent it to Rachel, having a weird but good time. More later. P. Dinner that night was at a seafood restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Julian had changed out of his conference attire into a dark blue button-down that made his eyes look almost black. He stood when she approached the table, pulling out her chair. "You look nice," he said as she sat. Paige had worn a green dress that Sophie had insisted brought out her eyes. "Thanks. How was the conference?" "Boring. I spent 4 hours listening to presentations about cargo optimization." He poured her a glass of wine from the bottle he'd already ordered. "How was your afternoon?" "Perfect. I just walked around and explored. No pressure, no schedule, no stress." She took a sip of wine. It was excellent, smooth and rich. "I can't remember the last time I did that." "What did you do before your father got sick, before the debt? What made you happy?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her that? "Art," she said finally. "History, museums, old things with stories. I used to spend hours sketching artifacts, imagining the people who made them and used them. I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a kid." "Why didn't you?" "Life got in the way. I needed to work, needed money. Museum work was practical. I could get a job, pay bills. Archaeology seemed like a luxury." Julian was quiet for a moment. "After the 6 months, you should do it. Study what you want. Go on a dig. Chase the dream you put aside." "Maybe," Paige said, but the idea felt more real now than it had in years. With the settlement money, with no debt, she actually could go back to school. She could take risks. "You should," Julian insisted. His intensity surprised her. "That's the whole point of this arrangement. You get your freedom back." "What about you?" Paige asked. "What makes you happy?" Julian considered the question seriously. "Building things. Not physically, but creating systems that work, solving complex problems. The company is like a massive puzzle, and I get to figure out how all the pieces fit together." "That's it. Just work." "Just work," he confirmed. "I'm good at it. It makes sense in a way people don't." Paige studied him across the table. He looked so controlled, so self-contained. "That sounds lonely." "It's efficient," Julian corrected. But something flickered in his expression, there and gone too quickly to interpret. The gala the next night was massive. Hundreds of people in formal wear filling a grand ballroom. Paige wore a floor-length navy dress that made her feel like she was playing dress-up, but Julian's eyes had lingered when he saw her, so she figured she looked acceptable. "Stay close," Julian murmured as they entered the ballroom. His hand was at the small of her back, possessive and warm. "There are a lot of sharks in here." He wasn't wrong. Within minutes, they were surrounded by people wanting to meet Julian's new wife, congratulate them on their marriage, probe for information. Paige smiled and deflected and held Julian's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're very young," one older woman said, making it sound like an accusation. 26, Paige replied smoothly. "Julian and I are 6 years apart. It doesn't seem that significant." "And you work at a museum? How quaint." "I love what I do," Paige said. "There's something incredible about preserving history, making sure future generations can learn from the past. Julian's hand tightened on hers, a silent message of approval. They danced 3 times that night. Each time, it felt a little more natural. Paige was learning the rhythm of Julian's body, the way he moved, the subtle pressure of his hand that telegraphed his next step. On their third dance, a slow song near the end of the evening, she rested her head against his shoulder without thinking about it. "Tired?" he asked quietly. "A little." "But it's a good tired." She looked up at him. "Thank you for this. The trip, the dress, all of it. I know it's part of the arrangement, but it's still nice." "You're fulfilling your end of the deal perfectly," Julian said. But his voice was softer than usual, and the way he looked at her made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with their arrangement. That night, back in their suite, Paige couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony in her pajamas, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the water. The door to Julian's room opened and he joined her on the balcony. He changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much in my head." Paige glanced at him. "You? Same." They stood in silence for a while, watching the city. Then Julian said, "You were right earlier." "About what?" "It is lonely. The way I live." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "I tell myself it's efficient, that I don't need people beyond professional relationships, but sometimes I wonder what I'm missing." Paige's heart ached unexpectedly. "It's not too late. After this is over, you could try. Let someone in." "I wouldn't know how." "Sure you would. You're doing it right now." She bumped his shoulder gently with hers. "Talking to me like a person instead of a business arrangement." Julian looked at her then, really looked at her. "When did that happen?" "I don't know. Somewhere between the first gala and now. I think we became friends." "Friends," Julian repeated like he was testing the word. "I don't really have those. You have Sophie, and probably other people at work. Those are professional relationships." "What about me? What am I?" The question hung in the air between them. Julian's expression was unreadable in the dim light from the city below. "I don't know," he finally said. "Something different." They went inside shortly after, back to their separate rooms. But Paige lay awake for a long time, thinking about the look in Julian's eyes and the way her heart had raced when he called her something different. Back in Seattle, their lives continued in the same pattern, but something had shifted. They started having breakfast together in the mornings, talking about their days over coffee and toast. Julian asked about her work at the museum, seeming genuinely interested in the details of exhibit design and artifact preservation. Paige learned about his company, the challenges of managing a global operation, the strategic decisions that went into every contract and expansion. One evening, Julian came home to find Paige sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by papers and looking frustrated. "What's all this?" he asked. "I'm trying to write a grant proposal. The museum wants to expand the maritime exhibit, but we need funding." She gestured helplessly at the scattered papers. "I'm not good at this kind of writing, too formal." Julian set down his briefcase and sat on the floor next to her. "Let me see." They spent 2 hours working on the proposal together. Julian's business mind cut through the academic jargon Paige had been struggling with, finding the compelling narrative underneath. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight and they'd ordered pizza that had gone cold on the coffee table. "This is really good," Paige said, reading through their final draft. "You're really good at this. It's just problem solving. You had all the pieces. I just helped you organize them." Julian leaned back against the couch, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "The exhibit sounds fascinating, by the way. I'd like to see it when it's done." "Really? You'd come to the museum? Why not? My wife works there. I should take an interest." The word wife still sent a little jolt through Paige, even though she heard it regularly now. But the way Julian said it tonight felt different, less like a title and more like something real. "Julian," she said carefully, "are you happy with how this is going?" He considered the question. "I'm content. The board believes our marriage is real. Richard is running out of ammunition. In another 3 months I'll have full control of the company and you'll have your freedom." "That's not what I asked." Julian met her eyes. "I know, but it's the answer I have." The weeks continued to slide by. 4 months into their arrangement, Paige realized she'd started thinking of Julian's house as home. Her room was filled with her things now, books and trinkets and the comfortable clutter of actually living somewhere. She knew which coffee mug was her favorite, which spot on the couch had the best view, how Julian took his tea. Rachel came over for dinner one night when Julian was working late. They sat on the deck with wine and takeout, watching the sunset over the Sound. "Okay, real talk," Rachel said. "How is this actually going?" "It's fine. Good, even. We're friends now, I think." "Friends?" Rachel's tone was skeptical. "Paige, I've seen the photos you guys post. You don't look at him like a friend." "Those are for show, are they though?" Rachel leaned forward. "Because I've known you since college and I've seen you with actual boyfriends. You never looked at any of them the way you look at Julian in these pictures." Paige's stomach twisted. "It's not like that. We have an arrangement. In 2 months, we're getting divorced and I'm taking my settlement money and figuring out my life." "And you're okay with that?" The question sat heavy between them. Was she okay with that? 2 months ago, the answer would have been an easy yes. But now, thinking about packing up her things and leaving this house, leaving Julian, felt wrong in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "I have to be okay with it," Paige said finally. "That's the deal." Julian came home an hour after Rachel left. Paige was still on the deck, nursing her second glass of wine and watching the stars come out. "Rachel left?" he asked, joining her. "Yeah, she had an early morning tomorrow." Paige looked at him. "Do you ever think about what happens after the 6 months?" "Yeah. We'll just go back to being strangers. We'll probably never see each other again." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know. Does it matter? That's what the agreement says. Agreements can be modified." Paige's heart stuttered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this arrangement has been more pleasant than I anticipated. You're good company. I enjoy having you around." He said it like he was discussing a business merger, but there was something underneath his words, something careful. "After the divorce, there's no reason we couldn't remain friends." Friends. The word felt inadequate for whatever was happening between them, but Paige nodded. "I'd like that." "Good." Julian looked relieved. "I'd like it too." The turning point came 5 months in. They attended a company party, a celebration for landing a major contract with a Japanese shipping conglomerate. Julian was in high spirits, more animated than Paige had ever seen him. He introduced her to everyone, kept his arm around her waist, laughed at her jokes. "You're in a good mood," she said during a quiet moment. "This contract is huge. It validates everything I've been working toward." He looked down at her, his eyes bright. "And having you here makes it better. Julian, dance with me." He pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor before she could respond. They'd danced together many times now, but tonight felt different. Julian held her closer. One hand played across her back, the other cradling her hand against his chest. Paige could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. 2 more weeks, Julian said quietly. 2 more weeks and the 6 months will be up, the company will be secured, and then we get divorced. Yes. But he didn't sound happy about it. Paige gathered her courage. What if we didn't? Julian stopped moving. They stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, other couples swaying around them. What? What if we didn't get divorced? What if we just stayed married and figured out what this is? The words tumbled out in a rush. "Because I don't think we're pretending anymore, Julian." I don't think we have been for a while. Paige, do you want to divorce me? Really want to? He stared at her, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. No, he finally said. No, I don't. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt lightheaded. Then why are we planning to? Because that was the agreement. You signed up for 6 months, not a lifetime. I can't ask you to stay in a marriage you never wanted. What if I want it now? Paige's hands fisted in his suit jacket. What if somewhere along the way this stopped being fake for me? Julian's breath caught. When? I don't know exactly. Maybe Vancouver. Maybe before. One day I woke up and you weren't my fake husband anymore. You were just Julian, and I wanted to have breakfast with you and hear about your day and fall asleep knowing you were down the hall. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I'm in love with you. I know that wasn't part of the deal, and I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just business. For a terrifying moment, Julian said nothing. Then he pulled her off the dance floor, through the crowd, out to a quiet hallway. He backed her against the wall, his hands on either side of her head, his face inches from hers. Say it again, he demanded. I'm in love with you. I don't know how to do this, Julian said, his voice rough. I don't know how to be what you need. I just need you, however you can be. Paige reached up, touching his face. If you don't feel the same, tell me. We'll stick to the plan, get divorced, and I'll walk away. But if there's any chance, he kissed her. After 5 months of careful distance, of controlled touches and professional boundaries, Julian kissed her like a drowning man finding air. His hands came to her waist, pulling her against him, and Paige wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she'd been suppressing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian pressed his forehead to hers. I'm in love with you too. I think I have been for months, I just didn't know what to do about it. Paige laughed, giddy with relief and joy. We could start by staying married. We could do that. He kissed her again, softer this time. But I want to do this right, court you properly. Take you on real dates, not business arrangements. Let you decide if you want this for real. I already decided. Then let me catch up. Julian pulled back enough to look at her properly. I've spent 5 months being your fake husband. Let me figure out how to be your real one. They left the party early, driving home in charged silence. In the house, they stood in the foyer looking at each other, 5 months of tension finally breaking into possibility. Your room or mine? Julian asked. Does it matter? No. He took her hand and led her upstairs to the master suite. The room she'd never entered in 5 months of living in this house. They took their time, learning each other without the performance of their fake relationship. Julian was attentive and careful, checking in with her, making sure she wanted this. Paige had never felt so desired, so seen. When they finally lay tangled together in his bed, she felt like she'd come home. I was so stupid, Julian said, running his fingers through her hair. Thinking this could stay purely business, thinking I could spend 6 months with you and not fall in love. We were both stupid, Paige said. I spent weeks convincing myself I was just playing a role when really I was just falling for you in slow motion. What do we tell people? The truth. That we got married quickly, spent time together, and fell in love for real. Paige propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. It's not even really a lie. That's exactly what happened. Julian smiled, and it transformed his face. Paige realized she'd rarely seen him smile genuinely. My mother is going to say she knew all along. Did she? Probably. She's annoyingly perceptive. He pulled Paige back down against his chest. What about your friend Rachel? She definitely knew. She's been telling me for weeks that I was in love with you. I kept denying it. They talked for hours, working through logistics and feelings and everything they'd been holding back. As dawn started to lighten the sky outside, Julian said, I don't want to divorce you. Not in 2 weeks, not ever. But I also don't want you to feel trapped. If you want your settlement money and your freedom, that's still on the table. I don't want the settlement, I just want you. Paige kissed his jaw. But I do still want to go back to school, study archaeology, take some risks in my career. Then do it. I'll support you however you need. Julian tightened his arms around her. We'll figure it out together. The next 2 weeks were a revelation. They stopped pretending there were boundaries between them. Julian worked from home more often, wanting to spend time with Paige. They had real dates, trying restaurants they actually wanted to visit rather than places where they needed to be seen. They talked about everything, catching up on 5 months of carefully maintained distance. Victoria came to visit, took one look at them and said, "Well, thank goodness you two finally figured it out." "You knew?" Julian asked. "Darling, I've known you your entire life. You've never looked at anyone the way you look at Paige." Victoria kissed her son's cheek. "I don't care how this marriage started. What matters is how it continues." Richard was less pleased, but his investigation had found nothing because there was nothing to find. The marriage was legal, real, and by all appearances built on genuine affection. When the 6-month mark passed and Julian maintained full control of the company, Richard retreated, bitter but defeated. A year after their courthouse wedding, Julian and Paige planned a real ceremony. Nothing huge, just close friends and family in the garden of their house overlooking the Sound. Paige wore a white dress she actually loved, and Julian cried when he saw her walking toward him. "I know we're already married," he said in his vows, "but today I'm marrying you for real. Not because of a contract or a company or debt, but because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Paige's own vows were simple. "A year ago, you made me an offer that changed my life. You paid off my debt and gave me my freedom. But the real gift was falling in love with you. You showed me what it means to be truly known and truly loved. I choose you today and every day after." Rachel was Paige's maid of honor and cried through the entire ceremony. Sophie, Julian's assistant, took photos that were real and unposed, capturing the genuine joy on both their faces. At the reception, Victoria pulled Paige aside. "I worried about Julian for so many years. He was so closed off, so convinced he didn't need anyone. Thank you for proving him wrong." "He did the same for me," Paige said. "I thought I was just surviving, barely keeping my head above water. Julian gave me space to breathe, to dream, to actually live." "You're good for each other," Victoria said. "That's all a mother can ask for." Paige enrolled in graduate school that fall, pursuing her doctorate in archaeology. Julian rearranged his schedule to support her, working from home when she had late classes, quizzing her for exams, celebrating every milestone. When she got the opportunity to go on a dig in Greece the following summer, he cleared his calendar and went with her, spending his days on conference calls while she excavated ancient pottery. "This isn't what you signed up for," Paige said one evening as they sat in a tiny Greek taverna, sunburned and exhausted and happy. "No," Julian agreed. "It's better. You were right. I was lonely. I just didn't know it until you showed me what it felt like to actually share my life with someone." 2 years after their courthouse wedding, Paige finished her doctorate. Julian was in the front row at her dissertation defense, beaming with pride. That night, he took her to the same seafood restaurant in Vancouver where they'd had dinner on their first trip together. "Do you remember what we talked about here?" he asked over wine. "You told me I should chase my dreams, study what I wanted, take risks. You did all of that. I'm so proud of you." Julian reached across the table and took her hand. "Now I have a question. What do you think about starting the next adventure?" "What adventure? A family, kids, the whole complicated mess." His eyes were vulnerable. "I know I said I didn't want that, didn't need it, But I was wrong about a lot of things before I met you. And now I can't imagine not having this with you." Paige felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, absolutely yes. Their daughter was born 3 years after that courthouse wedding, with Julian's dark hair and Paige's green eyes. They named her Rose, and Julian held her like she was made of glass, completely undone by the tiny person they'd created. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted in the hospital room, cradling Rose while Paige rested. "I'm going to mess this up." "We'll figure it out together," Paige said. "Just like we figured out everything else." And they did. It wasn't always easy. Julian worked too much sometimes. Paige struggled to balance her career and motherhood. They fought about schedules and priorities and whose turn it was to change diapers at 3 in the morning. But they always came back to each other, always remembered that they'd chosen this. When Rose was 2, Paige got an offer to curate a major exhibit at a museum in San Francisco. It would mean relocating for 6 months, disrupting their lives, pulling Rose away from her routine. Julian didn't hesitate. "Take it," he said. "I can work remotely. Rose is young enough that she'll adapt. This is your career, your dream. We'll make it work." So they moved to San Francisco for 6 months, and it was chaotic and stressful and wonderful. Julian ran his company from a temporary office, while Paige brought maritime history to life in a way that earned national recognition. Rose toddled through museum halls, learning to say artifact before she could say truck. 5 years after their courthouse wedding, on their real anniversary, Julian took Paige back to that same courthouse. They stood in the same room where a judge had declared them married in 15 minutes while they barely knew each other. "I've been thinking about that day a lot," Julian said. "How terrified I was, how certain I was that this was just a business transaction. And now I know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made, even if I made it for all the wrong reasons." He pulled out a small box. "I gave you a ring 5 years ago as part of a contract. I want to give you this one as a promise." The ring was perfect, a green stone that matched her eyes surrounded by small diamonds. Paige slipped it on next to her original wedding band. "I love you," she said. "From that weird, awkward day 5 years ago to this moment to whatever comes next." "All of it. All of it," Julian agreed, and kissed her in the courthouse where their improbable love story had begun. 10 years after that courthouse wedding, they renewed their vows on the deck of their house with Rose, now 8, as their flower girl and their son James, age 4, as the ring bearer. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, but it felt monumental. A decade of building a life together, of choosing each other every day, of turning a contract into a love story. 10 years ago, I thought I was just solving a problem, Julian said in his vows. I needed a wife and you needed money, and it seemed simple. But you complicated everything in the best way possible. You taught me how to love, how to be loved, how to let someone in. Every day with you is better than the last. Paige's vows were through tears. 10 years ago, I was drowning in debt and desperation. You threw me a lifeline, but you gave me so much more than money. You gave me hope, partnership, love, family. You gave me a life I couldn't have imagined. Thank you for taking a chance on a fake marriage that became the realest thing in my life." Rose and James stood beside them, tangible proof of everything they'd built. After the ceremony, Rose asked, "Why did you and Daddy get married the first time if you weren't in love?" Paige and Julian exchanged a look. They'd decided to be honest with their kids when they were old enough to understand. "Sometimes people make agreements for practical reasons," Paige explained. "Daddy needed help with his company, and I needed help with some problems I had, so we got married as partners. But then we fell in love," Julian continued, Because your mom is pretty amazing and I couldn't help it. That's weird, James declared. Very weird, Julian agreed, pulling his son onto his lap. But it worked out pretty well, don't you think? Rose climbed up next to them. I think it's romantic, like a fairy tale where the princess saves the prince, and then the prince saves the princess, and then they save each other. That's exactly what it is, Paige said, settling into the circle of her family. That's exactly what we did. Years continued to unfold. Rose went to college, studying business like her father but with her mother's creative streak. James followed his passion for environmental science, determined to make shipping more sustainable. Julian slowly stepped back from day-to-day operations of Everett Maritime, mentoring the next generation of leadership while spending more time with Paige. They traveled, finally taking all those trips they talked about. Archaeological sites in Egypt, museums in London, beaches in Thailand. They held hands in ancient ruins and laughed over wine in sidewalk cafes and grew old together in the best way possible. On their 30th anniversary, their children organized a party at the house. Rose brought her husband and their 2-year-old daughter. James brought his girlfriend, serious enough that marriage seemed likely. The house was full of people, laughter, life. Late in the evening, Paige found Julian on the deck, watching the sunset over the Sound like he'd done thousands of times before. She slipped her hand into his. 30 years, she said. Can you believe it? Some days, no. I still remember you walking into that courthouse looking terrified, wearing that cream dress. Julian kissed her temple. Other days it feels like you've always been here, like I can't remember what life was like before you. Do you ever regret it? The way we started? Never. Not for a second. He turned to face her, his hands coming to her waist in a gesture that had become habit over decades. You were my fake wife who became my real wife who became my best friend who became the center of my entire world. How could I regret that? Paige stretched up to kiss him. After 30 years, it still made her heart race. I love you. Thank you for paying off my debt and accidentally giving me everything I ever wanted. Thank you for saying yes to a crazy proposal from a stranger and accidentally saving my life. They stood together as the sun set, surrounded by the family they'd built and the love they'd created from the most improbable beginning. Behind them, through the windows, they could hear Rose telling their granddaughter the story of how Grandma and Grandpa met. It's a good story, Julian said. The best story, Paige agreed. Our story. And as the stars came out over Puget Sound, lighting up the same view they'd watched together for 30 years, Paige knew that every choice she'd made, every risk she'd taken, every moment of fear and doubt had been worth it. Because it had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect, imperfect, beautiful love story that had started with a contract and ended with forever. The CEO's offer had changed her life. But falling in love with him had transformed it into something neither of them could have predicted, negotiated, or planned. It was messy and complicated and absolutely perfect, just like love should be.